I wouldn't say it's noticeable. There's individual cases both ways where it's worse or better one way or the other, but I don't think we could make a blanket statement. There's a lot of owner renters in the community that either own the main floor, rent the basement, or guys that own several houses, and they're invested in the community as much as anybody else is, even though they're renting out their properties. But I think overall you could say that larger companies or companies without a community connection generally let the properties degrade more.
Degrade more?
Degrade more.
Was that right?
Of landlords, yes.
I almost had see, that's interesting to me, because I had sort of the opposite, I guess, assumption that a professional group managing the property is going to ensure that, yes, this is taken care of, this is looked after. But I mean, I guess that's a pretty good point. If they're a giant, you kind of get the corporate handle. You know what I mean? Obviously, it must be kind of tough to ensure that you maintain that personal connection to properties and communities, as opposed to that shoo-away corporate mentality. Is that a bit of a struggle to ensure that you're constantly in communication with these people? I
mean, we communicate with the tenants, whom we view as clients as well, right? I mean, they're paying the rent there, and our fees come from that. But our mandate is to facilitate the lease on behalf of the owner and be attentive to the tenant's concerns. We don't go beyond that to the community, or
no, you're not knocking doors. That's fair.
No,
sure.
But generally speaking, happy tenants make for happy neighbors, and we do our best to facilitate that. Yeah.
So is it true? I mean, people kick around the idea. I don't know. I did my reading. It's hard for me to say. Do rental properties, or I guess high density rental areas, decrease property values next door, down the street?
That's a big argument. I think there's multiple sides you can take, and there's points for everybody. I think clearly if you have a high density application that comes in and it's right next to somebody's house, it's going to affect the property value negatively.
Okay.
I don't think there's a question. For the community as a whole, for retail and whatnot, that's where the debate comes in, and it's very case specific, I would say.
Generally speaking, density leads to a higher and best use that points to redevelopment. So I would argue if a community is densifying, usually that means that people want to move there, they want to live there, and that increases the value of the properties nearby, and would point to higher values.
I think there's a lot of misconception about that, though. I think a lot of people would think just the other way. It must be a bit of a struggle to try and get people on board. I don't know whose onus it really is. Is this something that's discussed at the community level, though? Being that you say 55% are renters in Bowness, I imagine it's probably come up to, is there concern amongst residents in your community? I guess that's my question.
About specifically?
Oh, pardon me. About specifically having that high density of renters in the area.
I wouldn't say it's high density of renters. It's more the specific types of properties. There are certain landlords and certain blocks where there are more issues because they haven't been maintained. It's partly the renter's fault. It's partly the landlord's letting the properties degrade so that it only attracts certain kinds of renters. But I don't think it's the renter per se. I think it's more just the specific management of the properties.
Seems fair. Folks, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back after this. Stay with us.
Okay, so I'm a real fan of more density and landlord and tenants, this secondary suite thing. I think it's a necessary thing to happen in the city. We still have lots of fallout from the flood, but beyond that, this is a city that collectively moans about urban sprawl, but doesn't go, well, the way to treat urban sprawl is to allow secondary streets in the inner city. So I think it's a good thing, it's timely, it won't hurt anybody, it's all good.
I think the relationship between landlords and tenants should stay just that, the relationship between a landlord and a tenant. Everybody else should live their own life and butt out of people's business. If it's not your business what time people come home, what they do for a living, as long as they maintain their yard nice and they're not interfering with your life, it's good to go. I know a lot of problems start when people try to peek into other people's lives, and it creates animosity where there doesn't need to be any.
So I'm just going to ask you real quick, Brett. I touched on the fact that there is, at times, obviously, overbearing landlords. What rights do tenants have as far as notice to come into the building or whatnot, just for our viewers' sake?
You got to have 24 hours written notice if you want to enter the property, unless it's an obvious emergency. So they would, when we need to enter a property, we go down, we post a written notice on the door. we can follow it up with a phone call or an email and a text now. You know, tenants all have cell phones these days, so you do have to provide the proper notice and follow the proper channels for accessing a property.
What about sidewalks, mowing the lawn, snow removal, that type of thing?
A lot of that's spelled out in the lease.
Yeah.
So if you're renting a property, it'll be within there, and that's discussed. Hey, you got to shovel the walk out front. You got to do the driveway, the sidewalk, garbage removal. You can't leave stuff in the back, that sort of thing. And if a tenant's not doing it and there's a bylaw infraction, usually our lease allows us to pass that fine on to the occupant of the property.
Let's talk about secondary suites. It was clearly part of NECI's mandate. I think secondary suites are coming down. The legalization of secondary suites are probably on the horizon. How do we think that's going to affect Calgary communities? What issues? Clearly, I think parking could result in a bit of an issue. Increased traffic. Some people have complained about, you know, the potential transient. Are these real gripes? Are these real concerns?
I don't think they are. You know, if you want to legalize a secondary suite, you're required to provide 2 on-site parking stalls, 1 for each. And there is no law out there right now to go ahead and have 12 people, each with their own vehicle, living in a house, right? So, and there's a lot of houses that have a lot of vehicles anyway, and just by creating a second separate dwelling unit, I don't think that that's going to exacerbate a parking problem.
Is that going to work in Bowness, 12 additional vehicles?
Well, I don't think that's ever really a scenario, but I think every community is different. If you go to Silver Springs or somewhere out further out where it's quieter and there isn't the density, and there's maybe not quite the rental population, and there was an incentive for secondary suites, it might change the face of the neighborhood a bit. I'm not sure for better or worse. In Bowness, we don't really have a position on secondary suites. It's a very diverse community. There's an entire spectrum of everybody in there. So everybody has different points of view and concerns on it. But the comments we hear is that the secondary suites are already there. They're just they're not legal. And to make them legal, you might, you know, alleviate some of the safety concerns, some of the code issues, and get rid of that. And the parking and the people are already there. It's just a matter of protecting them.
Yep.
So that's some of the concerns. The other concerns is that they don't want to have, on the other side, people having their basements converted and having the rental population grow exponentially in certain areas and changing directions the community is already taking.
Which is, you know, frankly, could be a legitimate gripe.
Yeah,
I would think.
There's legit arguments on both sides.
It would do a world of good to bring the rental rates down. You know, provide more
affordable housing,
get more supply out there, and it'll drive the rents down. So if you're a tenant and you know, or more than half of the residents of Bowness are, more legalized secondary suites is just going to depress the rental rates for everything all the way up the spectrum and make for a, you know, a more affordable rental environment.
And some of the gripes are silly, frankly. Casting shadows was one that I was reading about. I guess Hillhurst had done a bit of a review amongst their residents, and that was a bit of a gripe. I thought, I mean, come on, if we're talking about affordable housing, casting shadows. But usually the secondary suites will be standing structures as is. It's not as though you're going to develop on top of your garage, or, you know, chances are you're developing the basement, could be a garage itself or in the garden space. A lot of hyperbole out there.
I mean, you can. There's 3 different classes of secondary suites that are recognized within the bylaw, but by far the most common is a secondary suite, so a basement suite. And they are already out there, and I think there's a lot of landlords that want to go ahead and do it. They want to make the investment. They believe in Calgary as a real estate market, and they want to do it, but there's an awful lot of red tape. Some very funny things within the city bylaw, like a basement suite can be no more than, I believe it's 830 square feet. So you just can't have one bigger than that, you know, and why, you know, I don't know. It's never been explained to me, but that's one of the bylaw requirements that our clients are forced to work around when trying to develop one legally.
We hear things from senior citizens, for example, that have a 1950s or 60s bungalow, and it would be a mortgage helper to have somebody living in the basement and help out, and somebody to help out around the house. So we hear that in favor of the secondary suites, but we also hear in areas where there's more issues, there's more density and more renters, if you take a house that fits 2 people and you convert it to 3 or 4 suites in the basement, rent single rooms, they each have friends, all of a sudden the neighbors don't know who lives there and it's coming and going, and you can have a lot more potential for problems of all sorts.
Is that legitimate? I mean, people get concerned. Is this something that's been discussed, like in a forum within the Bowness Community Association?
There's been no forum, and there's a broad diversity of opinion, so we don't really have an exact position on it, but we do hear a lot of different opinions. And we have certain areas in the community that are definitely an issue with renters that come and go on a short-term basis, and you just don't know who your neighbors are. And when you get to that kind of a state, it leads to more crime and more social issues.
Do you agree?
I mean, you're going to have bad apples anywhere you go,
Yeah.
right? I mean,
Yeah.
you can't paint every landlord with that brush. But I mean, I can't think that it would be a problem to go and make it easier for someone to legalize something and take away from something that is already there. You know, these basement suites exist.